Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the big question this evening. We're discussing, can Muslims in the West practice the same as Muslims in the East? I'm delighted to be joined by the former head of the Islamic Society of Britain, Julie Siddiqi. Julie, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
So do you reckon Muslims in the West can practice the same as Muslims in the East? Should we practice the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think, actually, it's very nice to be here, by the way. I think, actually, in some ways, I'm wondering whether we can actually practice it more or better here. And that might seem odd, maybe, to some people, but I think there's actually a lot to be said for that. I think there's a lot to be said for this country. I think that as a Muslim woman, I sometimes definitely feel that actually living in Britain as a Muslim woman is probably easier, in some ways better.
How's it easier?
Than living in a... I think some of the things that I'm seeing across the world happening in various Muslim countries, particularly towards women, but just generally with each other, I think is, seems to be hugely problematic at the moment. So I think living in take Muslim women living in Egypt, for example, and some of the things that they seem to be going through in terms of harassment. I heard a story from a friend who's just come back from Medina, saying that the access to the mosque in Medina for women seems to be getting less and less now. So there's almost, the huge mosque and then two small corners for Muslim women. These kind of issues.
You've got a lot of mosques in Britain that also are quite restrictive towards women.
No, of course, but but of
so.
course, but that's an issue, an intra-Muslim community issue that I feel very passionately, strongly about, and obviously oppose. But if you're talking about living in Britain and the kind of established things here, I think living as a Muslim in Britain is great. I mean, I've absolutely already said to my husband on many occasions, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
Let's talk about, for example, bringing up children. And would you rather do it in Britain, or would you rather do it in, I don't know, let's say Qatar or Saudi Arabia or such like?
I mean, for me, I'd rather do it in Britain. I'm not saying it's all easy. Of course, that's silly to say that. It's challenging. Actually, being a parent is challenging. I always say that I've got 4 children. The oldest, which is 16, I'm still waiting for the manual to arrive in the post to explain to me what to do, as a parent. It's not easy. Yes. But I think that's across the board for parents. It's challenging. And obviously for Muslim parents, we have extra things that we may need to think about. How do we make sure that they stay connected with a history that maybe they don't see around them day to day? Because living, as a minority in any country, really, you're always going to have that challenge. I don't think it's impossible, but I do think it is something that parents, I think, certainly most Muslim parents I come across are constantly aware of and re-looking at. How much, what do they have to look for beyond school? What kind of school do the children go to? All these challenges, I think, are things that are happening.
Do you think Muslims are becoming complacent? Do you think we Muslims, so we live in the West, we practice here, we have our mosques here and such like, we become a little bit complacent as to what we actually have before us?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people are always as grateful as they probably could be, just in terms of, or appreciative of what, as you say, of what we have in this country. And I think it's too easy always to point out the negative. And of course, there's lots of negative things about this country. We know about the media and all of what's going on there, negative stories, and then that's created an atmosphere for many people that's very difficult for Muslims, and for others is kind of suspicion. But I always feel that beyond that, there's so much more positive than negative. And I don't think it's, I've always been an optimist, so I accept that, there's some people that think the opposite to me. But I just feel that, we have a lot to be grateful for here. And what is being a Muslim? It's about values, it's about living a way of life as a person of faith. And I think, for me, we can comfortably do that here. Yes, we are complacent. I think we're so lucky in many ways, not just as Muslims, but anyway, living in this country. If you look at other countries and what they're going through, we've never experienced these things, and God forbid, hopefully we never will. But I think we also have to be aware of what our challenges are, and always be looking to make sure that we live the best lives we can, and for our children and the rest of our families.
All right, let's invite our callers to call in 0203 411 842. That's the number to call should you wish to share your views and your perspectives. I mean, let me dabble into sort of a bit of controversy and ask you, do you think Muslims in the West should adapt the way that they dress in order to cater for the community wherein they reside? Now, I'm not saying necessarily go outside the bounds of Sharia, but perhaps we should dress in a manner which may not attract negative attention.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting question if you phrase it in that way, but I just think, what is Islamic dress? Is what you're wearing Islamic dress? Well, some would say no, as a man, I'm saying. I mean, the tension's always on women and what we wear, so if I put it back onto men.
Yeah.
So some would say that, they need to be dressing as the Prophet did, peace be upon him, for example, for that to be the best dress that men could wear. And you could argue, well, actually, why is this not Islamic dress?
So let me put it in a male context, and then we'll move to the female context. So if I went to the supermarket, all right, for the sake of argument, it's Saturday, I'm going to the supermarket, and I decide I'm going to go in my suit as opposed to a distasha, right? Now, some would argue that it is better to go in a suit as opposed to turn up in the distasha or such like. Now, what's your view on that?
I think you should be able to choose. So I think people should be able to choose what they wear. I feel that it's better for people to wear the clothes that are generally acceptable in this country. It's not to say that people shouldn't wear other things, but I do think we need to be conscious of how we look. And I don't think it's giving in. I don't think it's giving up anything by you wearing your suit to the supermarket.
Why should I not? I mean, why would you not encourage me to wear a distasha? Because if all Muslims wore distashas on weekends to the local supermarket, then perhaps it wouldn't seem such a novelty. Eventually people will just get used to it. And in the same way, the hijab today is no longer seen as, oh my God, she's in hijab. Perhaps over time, the so-called Muslim cultural dress will become more acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, I think people should feel free to wear whatever they want to wear. I have no problem with that. So my feeling is that some people feel it's almost the opposite, that they should always wear that, and that by only wearing that, this is somehow not Islamic, or it's not really, you're doing it to fit in, and I don't think that is the case. I think, and I think you're right, the more we do these things, the better it is. But as long as we have the right mindset, people should be free to wear whatever they want to wear. I don't want to see any kind of laws or crazy things like that telling people what they can and can't wear. But as Muslims, we need to be aware of who we are and where we're living. And if it's about a mindset that says that wearing those kind of clothes or a different sort of dress to what is maybe seen as normal here is somehow more Islamic or more I don't buy that. I think people should be able to wear, we understand what our, if you like, boundaries are. Everyone has their own understanding of that as a Muslim. And it then becomes an individual thing, surely. It becomes an individual thing as to what women and men should be allowed to wear. I certainly don't like being told by men, for example, whether they be Muslim or not, what I should or shouldn't be wearing, or
Why
questioning,
not? Why not?
Or questioning.
Why not?
Or questioning why I don't wear certain things or why I do.
What's
I don't like
wrong with
being.
that?
Why should it matter to them? And this whole question around women's dress and hijab and all of that has become. How many talks are there? How many books are written? It drives me crazy. It's an individual thing first and foremost. And if there is going to be any discussion about it, it should be amongst women. Why do men need to get involved in that discussion?
Yeah, an interesting topic you raised. I mean, let's look at it. Okay, the burqa, for example, right? Now, many would argue that as a Muslim community, we should sort of discourage individuals from wearing the burqa in the supermarket because it will attract a lot of negative attention, and rather we should encourage individuals to dress like your dress, for example. I mean, what's your view on that? I mean, do you think we should really tailor our dress? Let's take a very explicit example of the burqa. We should tailor our dress in order to accommodate for those around us, not sort of in a derogatory way or anything, but do you think we should really consider that as a Muslim community?
No, I mean, on this issue, I've spoken, in favour of it, although I don't Islamically feel it's necessary to wear that. I actually feel quite strongly that, again, we shouldn't be told. So when the talk was there around maybe banning it in public, etc., I would have been one of the people, and indeed I was on the radio, etc., arguing that actually that isn't the way to go, and I don't believe that is the British way to actually, make something illegal. I mean, it just seemed crazy to me, because where's the boundary for that then? There might be lots of things that I feel offended by seeing people wearing in the streets that I don't like. So does that mean we have to ban those as well? It doesn't work for me. What I do think is that, again, it goes back to what I said earlier, is when people start to make, say, me or other people feel that somehow they are dressed in a certain way that makes them, that bit higher than me or that bit more Islamic than me by wearing certain things, or this is what was worn at the time of the Prophet, so we have to wear this as well. This is what his wives wore, so we have to wear it as well. I think as an intra-Muslim discussion we need to have about this issue amongst ourselves to really unpick that. You know, some of the things that people wore, I would argue, were worn by people at the time in those days, hundreds of years ago, in Saudi Arabia in the desert. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to apply in the same way as, you know, in 2014 in Britain. And it's not about fitting in. I don't think it is about that.
Well, why is it not about fitting in? I mean, if you why is it this whole issue? Why can it not be about fitting in? Well, why can we not say, look, if you wear the burqa to the supermarket, you ain't going to fit in, so, you know, you're better off just not wearing it.
Yeah, no.
In fact, you're just going to alienate yourself, you're going to get odd looks, you're going to look weird, no one's going to talk to you, some people will be afraid of you, you're not fitting in, just get over it. Why not just take that approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think some people have taken it. I haven't said that, but I think some people have said that, and maybe that is the way to go. But I think it needs to be a discussion. I think, you know, again, I shouldn't be able to say to someone, you shouldn't wear that or you should wear that. It's up to them. But I think if we have these discussions, and you know, what is it that makes people wear these things? On what basis are they doing it? What's their justification for it? What's their understanding of Islam for doing it? These things fascinate me, actually, because sometimes they're just passed down from one generation to another, or somehow it's just accepted that that's what they have to do, so they do. And that's fine, but then don't look at others and feel somehow what you're doing is one way, the only way, and what others, and that applies to lots of other things as well.
All right, well, let's remind our callers to call in. 02034 117 is the number to call should you wish to share your views. We're discussing Muslims in the East and the West. Is it easier to practice Islam in the West as opposed to the East? I mean, let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges. When it comes to, for example, prayers, you know, it's very difficult, isn't it, to accommodate to pray 5 times a day when you're in a Western country, as opposed to in the East. And if I'm in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, even Dubai, I can more or less pray anywhere. Every place has got a prayer room. So surely it's more challenging being a Muslim in the West as opposed to being a Muslim in the East.
I mean, I suppose in terms of logistics, perhaps, but I think most people now, most office, you know, places of work, most people, you know, especially in a place like London, there's mosques everywhere or places to pray. And even in main offices, it's not difficult to try and find either a designated place to pray. I just came from a meeting at one of the government offices and said to the guy that I was with, you know, I'd like to pray before I leave. Showed me to a prayer room, which was huge. Obviously, there's lots of Muslim staff there, and there was one for women, one for men, etc. And, you know, there was no issue. That's part of what they do. It's part of the service, I suppose, they provide for their staff. And, of course, most of the people that pray there are Muslim, as we know. And I think even if, you know, again, it's about a mindset. So we need to get into the habits of what are the prayers about. And in those kind of circumstances, it doesn't mean that we have to string it out and make it really long. You can definitely adapt your life in such a way that you try your best when you're at work even to just pray. If there isn't a designated place, make sure your colleagues around you know that you want to pray somewhere and you find a corner. You know, do it in an open way. I think people respect that. I think more and more as time goes on, as long as we as Muslims are open and explain what we're doing, and it's not somehow secret and hidden, because it doesn't need to be, generally I think people are really open to that. I really do.
Well, why should we not encourage all Muslims to move to a Muslim country as opposed to sort of, you know, being influenced by the corrupt practices of the West? Should we all not just move to Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Dubai is a bit, you know, but you know, such countries.
So are you saying there's no corruption in those countries?
I don't know, I'm asking you. I mean,
there absolutely is corruption in those countries.
Less corruption than in the UK.
No, I think it's just a different type of corruption. I think it's probably just a different type of corruption. But
yeah,
I think that, of course, there's benefits of living in countries like that, where you're not in a minority, where you can go into a place and pretty much eat what you want to eat. As you say, there's mosques and prayer places around. And of course, those things are challenging, but I just think, you know, there's something so comfortable about, I feel I have no problem being British and Muslim. You know, if I'm made to feel that I have to choose one over the other. Sometimes Muslims are made to feel that amongst Muslims, amongst each other. And sometimes we're made to feel there's a big debate about, but what is your loyalty? Well, my loyalty is with both. I'm very happy being both, very proud to be both. And I think that's important.
Can you be both? How can you be both?
Of course you be.
How can you be Muslim and British? Surely it's a bit of a British Muslim, some would argue, is a bit of an oxymoronic understanding. Well, you know, when you've got, when we look at sort of Britain, and one of the arguments often cited is, you know, things like foreign policy and such like. you can't possibly be proud to be British when you're going around invading countries and all the rest of it.
No, but that's not everything about this country. And of course, you're saying this to make me feel that. I think I absolutely have I genuinely have no issue. I have genuinely no issue. Of course, there's issues around foreign policy. Of course, there's some things, as I've said, many things in this country, as there is with every country, that would be problematic. But they're problematic not just to Muslims, but to other people as well. There's lots of people that struggle with the foreign policy.
British or Muslim?
My prime identity is both. One is my faith, one is my culture, one is where I was born, my country, and I feel very proud to be both. Genuinely. I don't say it because someone has told me to say it. I don't say it because I feel I have to say it. I'm absolutely British. I'm about as British as they come. But I'm also very proud to be Muslim, and I don't see any conflict between the two.
How well do you think that Muslims have integrated into British society?
I think in many ways very well, meaning Muslims are there in every walk of life that you can think of. There will be Muslims, not just in the obvious ones, like the doctors and the dentists and the accountants, everywhere. And, someone reminded me recently that London really is genuinely the most diverse Muslim population anywhere in the world. I mean, it's amazing when you think of it like that. So all those Muslims are doing so many different things, contributing so much to this country in so many different ways, and made this country better in many, many ways. But I think there are pockets. There are communities where Muslims are isolated as well, or they keep themselves to themselves, and I don't think that's healthy. I think there's no need. I have no issue with Muslims living with Muslims, marrying each other. All of that is fine. I can totally understand how that happened when people obviously first came into this country, and it wasn't that long ago. Let's just remember, it's still relatively new and growing. Of course, people tended to gather in certain areas and built the mosques and halal meat and etc., etc. And I think all of that is understandable, and still is to a certain extent. But I just think it's about mindset as well. It's not just about the physical space.
Muslim society in Britain has evolved through time, and by your own admission, we're able to practice in this country. There's halal meat, there's places to pray, even in government buildings, as you quite rightly pointed out. There's Muslim schools and such like. But do you think in order to take Muslims to the next level, there is a lack of leadership within the community here?
Yeah, I do.
Which is there is a lack of leadership.
Yeah,
why do you think that's
I think we often are very fragmented, and there's lots of kind of infighting, intra-Muslim fighting here.
Such as,
and I think that people are very, can become a bit territorial. Sometimes you'll hear stories where a new mosque is being built up the road, and when you actually look at it, there's no justification in terms of numbers. It's purely about different people from different areas of the world, etc., etc., or they've had a row with each other and someone else has decided to. These things are very unhelpful. I think people need to come around the table a lot more together, men and women, I might say. I would also argue, as a woman, and being involved in the community for a number of years now, there aren't enough women that are, encouraged or promoted, if you like, into some of those leadership positions.
Are women encouraged or are they unwilling? Because there's always a difference between the two.
No, I think it's more to do with not being encouraged, not given the space. If you're constantly made to feel, for example, I would say there's probably more mosques than not in this country that don't even have a space for women to pray. Let's forget about the problems that we're talking about in wider society in Britain, and let's just think about that. In itself, it's shocking that I'm even saying it. It's absolutely ridiculous that that's still an issue. It's a massive issue. If you then remove, essentially, or don't give space to half your community, what do we expect is going to happen? And of course, women are just made to feel that they are somehow not important enough, or their prayers are not as valid. These are the even subconscious messages that come from doing something like that.
We've got a phone call, so let's take that call and then we'll continue. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for calling in.
To both of you. It's really good that you're actually doing this topic because it's vital, and I haven't heard it on the media before, so to both of you, mashallah, well done. Everything you're saying, sister, is you're saying it as it is. We've got a perfect chance here in this country to live Islam as it was shown by the Prophet ﷺ and his Ahlul Bayt and the Sahaba that followed. You know, this is the time. We've got the chance. We've got the opportunity. And what you said about coming out of our groups, our little intra-groups, and it's time to do that, because as a new Muslim 25 years ago in London, the first thing that happens when you want to become a Muslim is you look around and you're surrounded by all these groups. And you don't know where to go. But as a new Muslim, alhamdulillah, what you actually find is that you can sit down around the table and you've got people from everywhere, every background, wearing every different type of clothing. And it's like Malcolm X said when he was on Hajj. He realised, you know, we were all one, this one family, this one ummah. And really, we have this chance in this country now to do that. Have you heard about the, I think it was about 100 years ago, there was a Muslim community in Liverpool?
Yeah.
Right.
Do you know that group?
No, I don't know. No,
apparently it was really growing beautifully, but Islam wasn't spreading at the time. We've got that chance now, and we've got to grab it. We've got to. Today I was in a community, it was Christian, secular, everybody meeting, and I'm very sad to say that two of the ladies said they found Muslims were very unsociable, very unfriendly. They didn't want to join in with the rest of the community.
Do you think that's true? Do you think we are unsociable, unfriendly, unwilling to engage, unwilling to join in, community activities and such like?
I think so in a lot of ways.
Oh, wow.
There are people coming out of it, but it is happening. It is like that. It has been like that.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed for your call and perspective. Julie Siddiqi, I mean, do you think we are unsociable, unfriendly?
No, I think
you argue we are integrated very well.
No, I think there are pockets, as has been mentioned, and I think some of it, let's be fair, is understandable to a certain extent. Certainly don't justify it, and I certainly don't think it's healthy. But I think we're in a situation at the moment which is interesting. We constantly see front pages on the Daily Mail that are very unhelpful in this regard. Almost on a daily basis, I kind of get my email that gives me all the front pages of the newspapers, and I sort of look at it half expecting some other awful stories about Muslims on the front pages. And it's very sad, and it's very difficult to deal with when you walk past the newsstand and you see those stories. And I think that climate that we're in has actually made it worse to a certain extent. Muslims feel, why should we engage? When people aren't engaging with us, why should we? But actually, for me, these stories create opportunities as well for us to do much more of what our caller just said, which is to do the general social activities that any healthy society of all people should be engaging with. Now, don't get me wrong, I was with a group of Christians and Jews and Muslims last week.
Yes. And
we were having some food, and I said, it has to be equal as well. And, there are lots of churches, for example, who never invite Muslims or others into their churches. They're very much to themselves. Yes. In some areas of the country, you kind of forget when you're in London. It's about, as I say, it's the most diverse place in the world. Yes. You go to places in Devon or, some parts of the Midlands maybe, and out in the countryside, middle of, Scotland, Wales, where it's not very diverse. How open are those people to each other? And these are the challenges for us, I think, to be able to deal with these issues. But it's two-way or three-way or multi-way. It's not just about Muslims reaching out, but I think, that's our way, that's our responsibility.
All right, well, we need to go to a break, but you're watching The Big Question live on Ahlul Bayt TV. As ever, you can call in after the break and share your views. 02034 117842. You can email tbq@ahlulbayt.tv. You can tweet at Ahlul Bayt TV. Do patch your views through on Facebook. We'll endeavour to take them into consideration. Apologies for my rather squeaky voice. No doubt it will be played at some gardener for your amusement, but we shall see you shortly. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to The Big Question. We're discussing, is it easier to practice Islam in the West as opposed to the east, or indeed vice versa. You can call in and share your views at 02034 117 842. I was very tempted to cancel the show because of my voice and the messages we're getting on Twitter, but I know how enthusiastically people must have been waiting for this show all week, so I did not want to disappoint. And of course, even more excited as we're delighted to be joined by the former head of the Islamic Society of Britain, Julie Siddiqi. Julie, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, one of the facts that people argue is that it's a lot easier now to practice in the West as opposed to the East, because we've got a lot of halal meat places and such like. Certainly in the London area, you can say Manchester, obviously in isolated areas, it may be a bit more difficult. But in the media at the moment, we do know that halal meat has sort of really come to the forefront. What's your view on the current discussion?
Gosh, I mean, in some ways I find it quite confusing, and it seems to be coming at us from all angles. And I think even again, in the intra-Muslim discussion about this issue, before it hit the headlines, and a couple of years ago even, I had some discussions with people and feel that it's not being really dealt with properly. You know, even within this, there's infighting, different groups. There's a huge business interest as well, which I think we can't ignore. As someone pointed out to me, imagine how huge it is. And I feel quite uncomfortable with that. I feel uncomfortable with what's happening now because, of course, it's Islamophobic. In many ways, there's no doubt. But I think as long as we...
Islamophobic?
I think aspects of it, of course, are. I think that I was talking to, in fact, some Jewish people recently who are fairly senior and who regularly and consciously have always defended halal industry alongside their own issues, even though actually they organise themselves, I would argue, on this issue, better than we do. Are much more stringent and strict on the controls, etc., but their numbers are smaller, so it's always a way up. But to be fair to them, they always stand up for and promote it on our behalf, if you like, and that's something they've always done and still are. I think within our own discourse, it's not healthy. And one of the things that I feel needs to be done, and we need to be smart about how we do it, is to really make the public aware that actually this whole issue of meat in general, the meat industry, the chicken industry, is problematic. Battery farming, how animals are killed, the number of meat, the number of animals. I think all of that, it's too easy for the general public to blame and to talk about inhumane treatments, most of whom don't know what they're really talking about, I would say. And I think we need to be smart about how do we, prepare our arguments, if you like, not to be overly defensive, although we feel very passionately about the issue, but actually to look at, how many chickens are actually killed, what kind of environment are they in when they are killed, is there really a concern for animal welfare here? Is this an animal welfare issue? If it is, why are people not dealing with those issues more than this? This is a small number in that sense.
No, do you not think that Muslims are just too keen to cry Islamophobia when a legitimate criticism is raised? I mean, what the Daily Mail, in essence, said was there is halal meat in Pizza Express, halal chicken in Pizza Express on the pizza, and no one knows about it. No, I mean, that is surely a very legitimate concern which was brought to the public attention. So rather than crying Islamophobia, we should just say, yes, it's wrong and it should be appropriately labelled.
No, that's right. But I think, again, speaking to Jewish friends about this, and obviously it's in their interest as well to have this dealt with properly, what they are saying, and I agree with, is labelling is fine. You can label. We have no issue with labelling. We'd probably be, I'm sure people are feeling, I wish I'd have loved to have eaten a chicken pizza in Pizza Express a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it's about being fair then with the labelling. And it goes back to what I said earlier about animal welfare in general. Are we going to label every chicken to make sure people understand exactly, if we're talking about animal welfare here, which is claiming what it is, then let's talk about this chicken and the journey it's been through and let people start to understand that a bit more, because then you really are talking about animal welfare.
The way we label eggs, for example, you've got
it's much better now.
Battery, organic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a good example, and I think that's only been recent. People are much more conscious, and in fact you feel really bad if you can only buy a box of eggs that's from caged hens, you kind of feel, but it's very specific. Some people have no issue with it, so they pick them up and buy them, no problem. And I think it's a good example, but I think So give people the real stories of all of the meat in this country. We'd have no problem with the labelling, but it needs to be fair labelling, I think. That's probably what I would say.
All right, another reminder to our callers, should you wish to share your views, 0203 417 842 is the number to call. I mean, let me ask you a little bit about education, Islamic education in the West, as opposed to Islamic or indeed general education in the East. Is it not easier to bring up children in Muslim countries as opposed to Western countries?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I said earlier, and as a parent, you know, always trying to juggle these things as to what's better, what's good education, really. So I think there's no doubt that in certain aspects of a child's education, a Muslim child's education in some of these countries is better, easier, job done. As far as parents are concerned, it's dealt with within one place at school, during the daytime, etc. I think here, that is sometimes more challenging. I think I've come to the conclusion after having 4 children, the oldest being 16 and the youngest being 8 and 2 in the middle, that every family has to decide what's right for them. And, you know, for us as Muslims, it's the same to think that all Muslim schools, for example, are the answer. I don't necessarily agree with.
Are Muslim schools the answer?
No, because I don't think there's one answer or the other. I think some Muslim schools are very good, some are not so good. Some don't have resources, some don't seem to have good facilities, and I think all of this is part of a good education. I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough to say that just because the children learn Arabic and Quran, for example, and these things during their school day may seem good for parents. Yes, send them their job done. Is it job done? What about the rest of the education? Is it all round? Are they coming out as good citizens? I think what I would say is that still being a new community, we actually don't really have that much to go on yet. There are very few schools where you've had a good cohort of children coming from beginning to end and coming out, and where did they go on to? There are some, but not that many. And I think that's still happening. So let's see what happens with those children. It is still an experimental phase, I would say, because I think some of the Muslim schools here are not as good as others.
Do you think, I mean, if there was a good Muslim school and a good, say, just call it general school, right? Where would you rather send your children, to the Muslim school or to the general school?
Well,
they're both at the same level.
Well, I think it depends on what you mean by level, but I think we consciously...
Outstanding, let's use the Ofsted, something, universal standard. Both are given the outstanding rating by Ofsted and such like. So they're both fairly decent. Where would you encourage?
I think we've consciously sent our children not to a Muslim school, and that was because we wanted them to go to in a particular area and to be around children from all backgrounds. It was a conscious decision that we made, and I feel that we made the right decision. It is more challenging then. It's more challenging for us because obviously they may not have that many friends around them that are Muslim. So how do we, as parents, make sure we balance that out or make sure we deal with that? So it's a difficult one. You can't say, I don't think. I think every family really has to make up their mind.
By that deduction, do you think that children that go to Muslim schools isolate themselves to their sort of isolate their being to a particular group of individuals which may harm them in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely better for people to be exposed to people from different backgrounds. And I think, again, it's a huge responsibility for the Muslim schools to make sure that the children that go to those schools... Well, I think it can do.
Is it an inhibition?
Well, I think it can do, but I would never say it does fully. It all depends on the school, and we need to make sure that Muslim schools are totally aware of the importance of good citizenship. You know, being a good... What is it to be a good citizen? You know, and we know that our faith absolutely endorses and encourages that and can teach us to be, you know, good people in the world and, you know, to care for all of humanity, the world, etc. And if schools are dealing with that in the right way, and I'm sure there are many Muslim schools that are very much inclusive in their own way, if those schools then work with other schools, make sure the children are mixing with children from different backgrounds, always encouraging that, I think it can be very positive. You know, there are some that are doing that, there's no doubt about it. There are some schools that are top of the league in their area. It's amazing that they've been able to combine the faith with the rest of the curriculum, which is challenging. The curriculum is huge, and to have to fit all of that in and the rest of it. But when you have good leadership in some of these schools, they can turn things around and come out as outstanding, and it's very encouraging to see that. I met some girls recently from a Muslim girls' school. They were amazing.
Which school was it?
I can't remember.
Oh,
it was one from up north somewhere.
Yeah.
They were amazing, just in terms of their approach, the way they were, confidence, the way they were presenting. It was brilliant. And I have no doubt that that was a really good combination of good education, good Islamic education, and kind of combined in a good school. It's quite obvious, with good leadership, good teachers. Those kind of stories are brilliant, and we need to promote those. We can't just dismiss Muslim schools as being, problematic. Of course not. But I think they need to be careful. Some of them are quite isolated, and that's, I think, unhealthy.
It's interesting, I mean, talking about Muslims in schools, maybe interesting to mention the current situation in Birmingham, where there's an alleged takeover of radical Muslims sort of taking over these schools and Islamifying them, all of the rest of it. What's your view on that?
Again, I mean, it's a complete mess, let's be honest. And I think there's an intra-Muslim element to this, and there is again, I would argue, Islamophobic. I'm not one to shout Islamophobia, I'm really not. And I'm very conscious of when I'm very conscious of when I use it and when I don't. But I actually feel there's aspects of that here. But I also feel the difficulty with something like this is when things are taken to the extreme. So the accusations and the way I believe that this is being dealt with by government or by local government is taking it, I believe, too far in one way. And I think the problem with that is if there are issues, and I actually believe there will be, in some of these schools there will be individuals who have tried in their own way to have over-influence on what goes on in that school, right? And I do believe that's happened. I believe that's happening in many places around the country. I've seen it in my own area.
So what do you mean by that? Let's be more specific.
I think the issue around people coming in, joining governing bodies or PTAs or whatever, and maybe even individually, imposing their views that makes the school actually less inclusive or takes away certain aspects of the curriculum, for example, music or certain things that they may feel very strongly about, and they kind of try and impose those. I've seen examples, I've heard examples like that. That does happen. Of course it will happen. Muslims are on a spectrum, different types of Muslims. And sometimes it can also be a personality issue, people just enforcing what they believe is right. So I believe that does happen, and I'm sure there are examples in Birmingham where people have got together and tried to do that as well, and in other places. But to say that that is so widespread, and to say that there's somehow a plot across the city, I don't buy that. So I think the problem with this is as soon as you take something to the extreme, either way, it means that the actual issues, if there are issues, won't get dealt with. Either by Muslims, so this issue has become so polarised, it's been dealt with, I believe, quite heavy-handedly by the media, etc., to the point now where Muslims feel, we don't have a problem, because this is how it's being dealt with. Well, actually, what if there are problems? Who's actually going to pick that up now? That's the bit I worry about, because I think there will be there will be people that someone needs to have words with. This needs to be looked at. But to send in overzealous Ofsted inspectors to do really not very good Ofsted inspections, it seems, these things don't help anybody. I mean,
let's talk a little bit about Islamophobia, because you're interesting. You mentioned, you made a point of mentioning that you don't like to use the term Islamophobia much. Well, why not? I mean, society at the moment, the argument is, when you look at the media, when you look at the offline media, online media, anti-terrorist legislation and such like, this country is Islamophobic, so why not talk about it?
Yeah, I have no problem mentioning it. I've mentioned it twice in 1 hour, less than an hour. And I think we have to, somebody in my position where I'm always talking about Britain and how amazing this country is, etc., and genuinely so, I also have to accept and always talk and genuinely openly will talk about how there are issues. There are issues in the media. Islamophobia is absolutely real. I believe it is there throughout in many people. But I think we have to not call Islamophobia on everything. I think we have to be very careful not to play the victim card on everything. So every time something happens, Muslims can easily say, you see, they're just against us, they don't like us. And it's very us and them dichotomy that I just don't buy into.
How do we deal with that? Because I've been to a couple of events. I went to an event recently, and the whole Islamophobia mantra was just going on and on and on. And you just get a bit sick of it. You just, Muslims are a community of crybabies. All we do is we cry, we claim that we're victims, and that's it. I mean, just get over it.
No, and that's where I think leadership comes in. I think that's where we need to go back to the time of times of old, as it were, and think about how did they deal with these things and how can we use those lessons now. I just think if we constantly claim the victim, if we're constantly being negative, I don't think it's the Islamic way, as it were, at all. And I think we need to be looking for opportunities. We need to accept the realities which are there. How do we turn these stories, how do we make people in this amazing country that we're in understand what Islam and Muslims are really about?
How do we? I mean,
and I think that
I
think there's many ways of doing it, but I think we have to be much more open. I think we have to be part of society, which we are, as I say, in every walk of life you can think of.
Let's get into specifics. I mean, what do you mean by
I think that there's
open?
a lot to be said. Okay, so I will give you an example. I'm going to be working on a project in the next couple of months called the Big Iftar, which is an amazing opportunity for Muslims who do iftar every day anyway, to open up, even if it's just 1 out of the 30, in their mosque or in their centre or in their home or in the street, open up the iftar to everyone, to people who aren't Muslim, specifically invite people in, iftar with the homeless, etc. These are really simple, very, very Muslim-friendly things to do. We all love Ramadan. We all love hospitality. Yeah. We love charity. This is a no-brainer, as it were. We have to do this stuff. It never fails. You know, any of these simple getting together people around food, having a tea with someone, bringing them into your house, it never fails. And these things might seem so simple. You think, really, is this going to change the way that Muslims are perceived? I absolutely believe it will. This kind of interaction, socialising, having people around your house. People come in your house and realise, oh my gosh, their house is just like my house. Yeah. You know, what's different? Their family is just like my family. Because that's, at the end of it all, that is what it's about. I think we can offer a lot, and I think we can sometimes be too, feel that we have to keep ourselves to ourselves. I would say let's open up a lot more. And if we can use Ramadan as the start of that, then more the better.
Julie Siddiqi, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Thank you to those viewers and also to those that called into the show to share your views. As ever, you can email me your feedback, tbq@ahlulbayt.tv. Thank you again to our guest, Julie Siddiqi. We shall see you at the same time next week, and hopefully by then my voice will be a bit more audible too. Assalamu alaikum.